I didn't really dress up. I felt like I'm going to the barn to volunteer.
It's November 22nd, 2019, and we are doing interviews of Stanfordville residents for the Stanford Historical Society. And with us today, we have Mrs. Marion Bennett. And if you could just tell us what your relationship is to Stanfordville.
Okay, I'm now Marion Bennett. I was born in Stanfordville, 1926, and as a very young child came to live with my grandparents, Lucian and Belle Taylor, on Bull's Head Road in Stanfordville. It was a little narrow dirt road, and in the building we're in right now, I came to school when I was 5 years old. A friend of mine, we were the two youngest, starting at 5 years old, no kindergarten back then, and we were always at the top of the class. And we had a teacher here named Mrs. Mitchell, and I grew up in the house on Bull's Head Road with my grandparents, 100 acres that we roamed over, especially in the summertime. There were three of us, my brother and sister and I, and we were so happy in the summertime because cousins came to stay. A cousin from Poughkeepsie would stay all summer, and there was a cousin from Newburgh and a cousin from Connecticut. And we roamed the 100 acres. There was a stream and a pond. We'd fish. We weren't allowed to have a fish hook. We had a bent pin. That was fun. Once in a while we'd catch a fish, but never a trout, I don't think. We'd catch a sucker or something. My grandmother wouldn't let us eat those.
Where was the pond?
The pond was on the property. Is it still there?
We haven't found one.
There's a pond. I haven't, because there's a big fence around there now. Just, I guess it would be west of the house. You'd go into what was the barnyard where the cow barn and horse barns were, and chicken coops, and there was a stream and a pond.
Could that have been like across the road from the house on the Kinsey property?
No, the pond was on the Taylor
It was on the
property.
Taylor.
Is it right by the road?
Right by the road.
Okay, it's...
It looks like a
Still really-
sandbank. Maybe
Okay.
it might look like a sandbank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where the thing, okay,
It's there.
it's there, so.
It's there. It's still there.
What was the house like?
The house was big. I understand now, I never thought about it when I was a child, but it's 10 rooms. And what was originally our big kitchen has been changed into a living room, and a smaller kitchen was made. And let's see, there were 2 bedrooms downstairs, and upstairs, I don't know, maybe 4. My grandparents used to have boarders in the summertime, and they used the downstairs bedrooms. And how would we play? I don't know. In the winter, lots of snow and sleigh rides. You could sleigh ride down the dirt road hill right outside the property. What else?
What kind of outbuildings were there?
Oh, yeah, we didn't have, by the time I remember, we had electricity, but not running water or a bathroom. So we had an outhouse, a toilet, that we'd have to walk to outside, and I guess that was the thing then. I guess it was sort of gruesome, but we had little porcelain pots to do everything in, and had to empty those and clean them out every morning. It was cold in the wintertime with wood stoves. We had one in the kitchen, one in the dining room, and we used to huddle around it when it was really cold. And it was cold in the hallways in the winter. In the summer, it was wide open. We'd go in all the rooms and just play all over the place.
In the wintertime, when it was really cold, did you like close off the bedrooms and then stay down in like where the living room area was?
I can remember if it was real cold, my brother and sister and I slept on couches, I can remember, where the stoves were, I guess.
How did you get to school?
We walked, it was about a mile. It was a mile. I can remember some funny things. I can remember like in the winter time, my grandfather had like an old Ford, Model T Ford or whatever it was. And I remember once he was the only one that made it up this hill, and people were up here clapping because he made it. Otherwise, we'd walk, and there were a few, children, girls and boys to walk with on the way to and from school. I remember there were two boys my age in my class who used to scare me in the fall. There were big piles of leaves, and they'd tell me there's something in there, and I'd be afraid to go by it. But you all know Dorothy Dot Burdick. She lived just a few doors down, so she didn't get to walk with us very far. But she and I belonged to the same church. It was the Congregational Christian Church. Now it's United Church of Christ.
Right. What about like Geneva said, what other buildings were on the property? You mentioned the one.
Oh, there were about maybe 3 chicken coops where we had chickens. Usually early in the spring, my grandfather would get young chickens and they would grow, and we'd always have to feed the chickens when we came home from school and get the eggs. My grandmother sometimes used to barter eggs at the store, take eggs to the store and get sugar or flour, I guess, or something. I don't remember what it was. What was the other? Oh, the buildings. There was a cow barn. We had quite a few cows, not a big dairy farm, but my grandfather would milk the cows by hand, and we would get to help once in a while, and take the milk in big milk cans to the creamery. It was called the Creamery on Creamery Road.
Oh, the Borden's?
Borden's.
The Borden's Creamery,
Yes,
yeah.
sometimes we'd get to ride with him, take the milk. He had 2 horses, and he'd use those for plowing. And I don't know what he would do in his wagon. Sometimes we'd ride to school with his wagon and the horses. So there was a cow barn and the cows and the milk and the horses.
When you look at, if you stand on Bull's Head Road and you look at the house, where were the barns and the chicken coops?
Well, straight back from the house, there was a big building that was like partly garage where he kept the car, and it was also the wood house. He would saw wood too on the property. He probably used the horse and wagon to gather logs, fallen logs, and he would saw the wood, and it was kept there in a wood house. Then there was a chicken coop. The chicken coops were like in a row, 2 or 3 down from the big barn-like wood house garage building.
You said that it had electric, the house had electric, but it didn't have water.
Right.
So was there a pump outside that you had to go out to?
First of all, we didn't have a pump. There was a well, and that's another thing we had to do. Right outside what was probably your living room now, or family room, was the kitchen. Just walk outside the door, there was a well, and you would put the pail on, wind it down, get the water, wind it back up, bring it in the house, dump it in some kind of a vat. At the end of the kitchen wood stove, I remember now, there was a big tank that would heat the water.
So it was basically just like an open pit out the door?
No open pit. It was a wooden structure that held the well. It was wood about this square and a handle on it, and you would put the bucket on there, and lean it over, and it would go down somehow or other. It must have had weights on it, I don't remember. Must have had weights on it so it would dip into the water and you would wind it up. No, it wasn't open. And I don't remember, probably in the 1940s maybe, when my aunt and uncle took the house over, they put water in.
When you say your aunt and uncle, is that Dorothy?
Dorothy Johnson.
Johnson
Mhm.
took it over. Now, who was your mom?
My mother was Hazel, and she had two sisters, Frances and Dorothy. My mother and her sister Dorothy married brothers, the Johnsons, Roland Johnson and Reginald Johnson.
Yeah.
So that's where my name Johnson came in, and it was their daughter. They had one child. They lived in Poughkeepsie, and she would come up summers.
And that's
Instead of-
Dorothy too?
Yes,
And that's Dorothy who became a Zamuda?
Samuda.
Samuda. Okay.
Yes.
And she lived in, they built the house on the hill?
Oh, I think her mother did that. Her mother sold the big house and built the house up on the hill. She made it into like a two-family house. She lived in half, and I guess the other half was to be my cousin's, Dottie's. I don't remember exactly. Yeah, I don't think they had anybody else there.
Do you know, you don't really know anything about Lucian with the fire company, you said?
Well, yes, I remember that if the fire whistle blew, he jumped in his Model T Ford and went fast to the fire. Mostly back then they were chimney fires, because most everybody had wood stoves. And they were mostly, I don't remember hearing about any big fires, but mostly they were chimney fires.
Right, and he was a charter member of the fire company?
He was a charter member,
Yeah,
and now my son Jack is a member of it. It was like full circle.
yeah. Your mom, or not your mom, your grandmother, Belle, did she get involved like in any of the organizations in town? I know like there was like the temperance group, and there was like a, during the war, there was like an auxiliary where the women used to like, almost like a Red Cross type thing, they used to like make bandages and things like that for the war effort or anything. So did she get involved in any of those things?
That would have been World War I, before I was born. I don't remember her ever talking about it, but she was a big-time member in the WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union. And I remember she was friends with, well, there was a funeral parlor in Millbrook called Allen's Funeral Home, and she was friends with Mrs. Allen. So when my grandmother died, she put a white ribbon on her in the casket, or a little white bow, because I guess they wore little white bows. My grandmother also was a member and always attended the Congregational Christian Church. We went to Sunday school there every Sunday. I remember walking there in my black patent leather shoes, and they would get so dusty on the dirt road. She would always make things maybe for their suppers, a chicken pot pie, or she made another thing. We raised pigs too. I didn't tell you about the pigs, I guess. We had pigs. They were near the chicken, right back there. Pig yard was right back of the big building where the wood was kept in the car. And my grandfather butchered pigs. He would stick them. We didn't get to watch that till we got older, I guess. Stick the pigs, and then they'd have to hang and bleed. And then he would butcher them. He had a big standard where we always had 2 pigs. He would buy them in the spring and then raise them all. Some people get attached to their animals. I know now people do get attached to their chickens. They wouldn't think of eating them, but we ate a chicken every week or two. And the pigs, he would butcher the pigs, and he had a ham house that was back of the house too, a little ham house. It was about the size of the toilet. And he would smoke the ham and the bacon. And he would take the chopped, I guess, the pieces of pork to a man. There was a butcher in Stanfordville, right in the center, Ford Frieda. We call him Ford Friday. But I think now people might say it was Friedah, I think. And he would make the sausage for him, and he'd bring that home.
Did they have a root cellar where they stored,
I guess we had potatoes, onions.
but was there an actual like root cellar anywhere on the property?
I don't think we did, no. I heard people talk about root cellars, but I don't think we had one. And it was during the Depression. Well, I was born in 1926, and I read stories and hear stories of how poor people were and no food and starving. But I guess because we lived on a farm with all that food, we didn't even think we were poor because we had so much food. We had milk and cream. My grandmother made butter. She would set the milk aside. There was always extra milk, skim off the cream, and we'd have to churn the butter, turn the handle on the churn, and it would turn into butter eventually. Sometimes it would take forever and ever. And maybe that's why I didn't ever like butter, because it was probably stronger than the butter that you eat these days. It's much milder. It was saltier and stronger because it was made from sour cream, not sweet cream. And sometimes she would sell some of the butter if anybody wanted to buy it. But I guess we always had so much food and clothes even. My grandmother used to sew a lot. She could make everything. My Aunt Dorothy even made a wedding gown once. I don't know if you ever heard of the Curry farm.
Yeah.
The pheasant farm.
Yeah.
Anna Marie was one of my best friends, and my Aunt Dot made her wedding gown. I remember that way back.
Wow. Dot Burdick used to play with her too.
Oh.
I remember Dot talking about that same little girl,
Oh, Anna Marie.
Anna Marie. And then there was another woman too whose family was friends, Mary Freer.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember her from up on Huns Lake?
Yes.
Her parents were friends with the Currys as well.
Yeah.
And
Mary Freer married a man named Bob Lyle from Millbrook, and she came to Millbrook to live. And I'm trying to think.
actually, we went up to Massachusetts and interviewed her.
Oh,
Yeah, so she had a lot of great stories too.
I have a friend named Connie Freer, but I think she married. Her first husband might have been, or was that her maiden name, the Farrows? Mary Farrow, F-E-R-O-E, lived right down there. They had her father had a gas station or a garage.
I don't know that name.
Oh, I'm getting those mixed up. But Connie Freer might have been related, my friend now, to the Freers at Hunt's Lake. I don't know.
One of the things when Geneva bought the property is that she found a gravestone on it, and it was for a Preston. And we kind of put two and two together that possibly when they put the family stone on the grave up behind the church, that they removed the old stones, and somehow the stone ended up back at the house where the Prestons did live at one point.
That's the funniest thing.
So-
I remember seeing that stone, but I don't remember what it said on it. But I married a man in Millbrook named Preston Bennett. But I had nothing to do with that. I don't know who his mother, because she was from a Reed family, which was quite well known around Amenia, Millerton, into Millbrook. I don't remember the connection, no.
But you never saw like a graveyard or anything on the property when you roamed around on it?
I saw that stone
You
out
saw-
back of the pig. It was back of near the pig pen.
Oh, so, because so it made its way around on the property apparently.
Have you seen it?
I found it. It was the day we got the septic looked at, and it had snowed. We hadn't moved in, and it was on the side of a hill by the road. It
Oh,
had been covered, and so we used chains to stand it up, and I've been maintaining it, cleaning it. But yeah, it must have moved.
I never saw it there, although it wouldn't have been that far or that many years ago. I might have forgotten where I saw it. We used to go up that hill and pick wild strawberries. I remember that.
Is that the hill that would lead up to where Dorothy's house was?
Yes,
Up
up there. Yeah, it wasn't a house. It was the little woods, just a little wooded area there that we were allowed into. Later on, we would sometimes take our little packed lunch, probably peanut butter and jelly, and walk the 100 acres, which was about a mile up the road. And somehow or other, I think we weren't supposed to be that far away from the house, but we would do it. There was up there something called an old apple orchard, and I think there may have still been some apples up that way, or old apple trees.
Was there other fruit on the property? Other trees that you remember?
There was a couple of pear trees, apple trees, grapevines. We had several gardens. Like if you're facing the house with the other road behind you to the left, we had a double garden there. One was the bigger vegetables like corn and potatoes, and the other side was onions and peas and green beans. And I didn't used to like it to have to pull weeds and pick vegetables.
Do you know how Lucian came to Stanfordville? You know, what brought him, and how did he meet Belle?
That's the part I wish I knew now, and I don't. I guess it had been mentioned over and over again. I never thought to ask until even my mother was gone. I just know that Mrs. Arnold brought them there to take care of her and the property, and she left the property to them. She was the Quaker. I don't know if they ever went to a Quaker church. They always went to the other church. But they talked about her a lot. They called her Arnold, not Mrs. Arnold. They talked about Arnold, this and that and the other thing. Not too much about her, but somehow I don't know how they got him. I know he was born in Virginia, and he started out. My grandfather was smart. He didn't have much schooling, but he could read and he could do all kinds of math in his head. But he started out from Virginia and went into the city of Washington, I guess, and drove a buggy for a doctor. But how Mrs. Arnold got a hold of him and brought him up here, because my grandmother and her family were more from New England.
It makes you wonder how they met.
Yeah, if she brought them both here and they met, nobody else to fall in love with, and they weren't really cared about each other, were very loving and kind and to everybody and to each other.
I looked up a lot about the property, and I found an ad that I think your grandmother posted, and she mentions for summer boarders.
Yes.
And she mentions there's a tennis court on the property. Do you have any recollection of where that was?
No. Talking about gardens, there was another garden. That was a flat piece of land back of the pig pen. There was a garden, so maybe there that would have been a flat area, or up where the house, the house that
On the hill.
on the hill,
Okay.
that was a flat area up there. I don't know. I never heard of that.
Do you remember a little road that would have? It's in the wooded section you were talking about, and it leads from our house up to the house on the hill. Do you remember anything about? It's just a tiny little dirt road.
Yeah, well, it was like a path. We used to walk up that path to get up there.
Okay.
There was a wooded area on both sides, and we would walk the path up through there. Oh, it made me think of something else that you might, but it slipped my mind now.
It'll come back.
What else? Oh, about the summer boarders, was that it?
Did you ever meet any of the boarders?
Oh, yeah, we lived there, and we ate with them, all the 3 meals with them. Well, What was it about the Borders?
They probably almost could come in on the train to the
They
station
came in
right
on the
there.
train, and I think my grandfather met them
Oh.
at the train station. We used to take walks with them around, up and down the roads. Oh, I thought too about the neighbors, because we weren't close to like Dot Burdick and the people up this way. All of our neighbors, most of our closest neighbors, were what in Millbrook we call the weekenders. We call the summer people. They came just in the summer. Down the road, Gristmill Lane, there was a man named Mr. Lawler, and he had a big place, and he came all summer. Then sort of across the dirt road going west, the Pitcairns, Rachel Pitcairn and Marguerite Sullivan, they would come there. They were teachers, I think, in New York City. They would come for the summer. Marguerite had one son, Arthur. I still laugh about that. He was an only child and so lonely. And he'd come to play with us some, but mostly we'd go over to his mother and aunt's place. And he would just cry his eyes out when we left. He was just, because we would play with him for quite a long time and have fun. And when he left, he'd stand at the edge of the driveway and cry and cry and cry.
Oh.
And we had other people that we played with in the summer. The McDonald's had kids there in the summertime.
And where was McDonald's house?
If you go like about a mile up Bull's Head Road to the end of our property, on the left-hand side there was the McDonald property.
Oh.
On the right-hand side, next to the end of ours, was a woman named Mary Ehlers, Ehlers. We used to run out to look at her every time because she had a fancy carriage, I guess you would call, that she'd use one horse and go up the road, to shop.
Is that the house where Castle Moore lived in later?
No, the next one is
The next one?
That was the fun place. The Moores came up there for the summer. Buster Moore, he was Castle. I think his father's name was Castle, too. And we used to play with Nancy and Buster.
So the house where Miss Ehlers
Would be in between.
Is that little white one that sits it's closer to the road, and then Castle Moore's is behind?
Yeah, they had a long driveway.
Okay. And then McDonald's house, I'm thinking, is
Across
it's
from the Moores.
across, and it has like a little lane that goes down in.
Yes.
And the house, when you went in, you kind of like parked in front of the house.
Probably. I never went down. That isn't so. I guess because we went there a few times, but we used to go, and I never went to this Miss Saylor's house. I was never in there, but we went to the Moores all the time because the kids were our age, and we went up there to play every day. And
Would you walk the road or go cross lots to get there?
we would walk the road. Mostly we would walk the road. Yeah.
What was it like with snowstorms? What would happen like with the roads with the snowstorms?
Well, we had a snow plow that would go through, and I don't remember snow days, but I guess there must have been days when we couldn't get to school. I don't remember much because I never went to school board meetings here. In Millbrook, for many years, I was clerk of the Millbrook School Board, so I know the time and effort and thought that went into whether there was no school or not, or how to decide. But we walked. I guess maybe we always had school, because everybody would walk. We didn't have school buses, and everybody walked from Bangor. All of them walked down. The Churtons all walked down to school, and from Stanfordville, the Nemesis were the one family that were sort of close to us that had children. They lived past Lawler's house, and there was a long lane, and it was a little tiny house, and it was like, they were Hungarians. And I guess it seemed like so exciting to go there because they seemed to look and act a little different. I don't know why. We were probably mostly always the only black family in Stanford. But we'd go to the Nemesis. I forgot that they lived down there.
When you went down past Lawler's, would their house be on the left-hand side?
On the right-hand side would be a driveway before the Kellers. There was a
Okay.
Mr. Keller, Herbert Keller, who had a dairy farm right past Lawler's. But in between, there was a little bit of land, I guess, that went down to the Nemesis.
So I wonder if there must be a foundation maybe down in there, an old foundation.
Yeah, I don't know who,
Probably.
yeah. Oh, actually, I was down there once because I worked in Millbrook for many years, just for 4 or 5 years ago, for caterers in Millbrook. And one of the caterers, we had done a party down there
Oh, really?
after it was done over. Yeah, it must have been torn down in a house.
A new house is in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just, now I forgot what I had to come up with a question. Oh, the house itself. Do you remember any evidence? The tale for that house, one of the tales is that it was an Underground Railroad house.
Oh, yes, that's the important thing.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So, anything that you can share on that?
Well, all I know is that it was used as the Underground Railroad because, I'm sure, because Mrs. Arnold was a Quaker. And they would come in and I don't really know where they stayed. I have a cousin in Poughkeepsie. She lives now in Mount Vernon. She was, her grandmother and my grandfather were brother and sister, and they used to come a lot from Poughkeepsie. And she claims that she saw a hole where they went in through, but I never saw it, and I lived there. I think she either saw off what was our old kitchen, there was a little stairway, and we called it not the attic, but the garret. It was like a storeroom or a small attic. There was another big attic off the main, if you go the main staircase, and in the ceiling there was a hole for the main attic. But this was a little garret. And I think maybe the underground, the people that came through the Underground Railroad stayed up there.
In the small garret?
I think so, because there was a small door, and that's a cousin of mine who says that's where they went in, it was that hole. And the other thing she might have thought was a hole. There's a big fireplace in the big room, and on the side of the fireplace, I guess it wasn't what would be called an old brick Dutch oven.
Mm-hmm.
We stored wood in there. Maybe she thought that hole was where the runaway slaves would go. But that was another story, that my grandparents were runaway slaves. Somebody wrote that in the Stanford historic book. But I can't believe that because they were born in the late 1800s. And the Civil War was during the 1860s.
Right.
And they weren't born until the 1880s.
Yeah, that's disproved.
So Dot Burdick said she got it straightened out. I think Patty Henry, I knew her in school. She lived next, down here, turn left out of here. Then on the right-hand side, there's a big house.
The big white house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her grandson wrote that history, but he had never met
Right.
any of us.
I think that was like their family lore, that somehow or other someone had come
Yeah.
up with that and they just passed it.
Yeah, it was all mixed
Right.
in together, that
Right. Yeah,
about
but-
the runaway slaves and, or, the Underground Railroad and all of that.
Right. Yeah, definitely not the case. So, if you, like me, I'm not familiar with the house. So when you say that there's like the garret attic, if you stand in the roadway and you look at your house, your old house, which
Where
side?
was that be?
Yeah.
That would have been facing the house on the right. That would have been where the well was on the outside. Probably it was grass once upon a time, but then it had been made into a stone patio, sort of. Is it stone now?
Yeah.
There's stone there now. And the garret would have been right upstairs. The kitchen would have been there, and you would have gone. I'm all mixed up in the house because my aunt, when she built it over, I think she built a different. She made the garret into a bedroom, and it's a big bedroom now, and a different stairway up there. So I don't know if there are two stairways.
Whoever purchased it, I think in the 90s.
Might have
I don't know
changed
what
it.
they did. They did
Yeah.
a lot to the house.
Yeah.
They changed it a bit.
Yeah.
Do you have old pictures like from the family at gatherings at the house?
I could look through and see, because I know I didn't have very many. There became my cousin, Dorothy Samuda. Somehow or other, she became estranged from our family. We would come up and visit her. She was always close to us. We were like double cousins. And I don't know if it's because she didn't have children, and I had 3 children. My sister had 9. My brother didn't have any. But maybe we became so involved in our families. Maybe she felt left out. I don't know, but we'd come to visit her. She was even my daughter's godmother. And she had the pictures and what became of everything in that house. We don't know what happened to it. Old furniture, old pictures.
There was a point in time where the house was emptied of things, because actually I had told you Toby Ricciardelli, he's gonna be here just in a few minutes.
Oh.
I call it dump diving. He, like a lot of the older people from town that have been around a while, they would go to the dump and they would look for things
Yes.
from the old houses as they got cleared out. And he found things from Dorothy's house.
Oh.
And within the things was a small envelope, and it had negatives in it.
Oh, you
So,
said that.
Yeah, and actually I gave them to somebody, and they're processing them, and they said, actually, I did see them, because she has them digital, they hadn't printed them yet. They're beautiful.
Oh, they came
there's
out.
like
Oh.
one of a, kind of like a picnic, and I wanna make sure you see the picture so you can identify it. There's a picture of a beautiful woman. So, so maybe we'll be
Yeah.
able to get you some of, from that.
Yeah, because after I got married, we would still, my husband and I would, and our kids would go to Stanfordville every Sunday for cake. And also there were family get-togethers always up there, but
Did you go to their 50th, Lucian and Bell's?
yes, big
I found a
50th
newspaper
anniversary. I
article.
saw a picture, I might have a picture of that, or maybe it was the newspaper picture.
Yeah, because the newspaper actually had an individual picture of him and a picture of her.
Oh,
And then I can make a copy of it if you'd like the article. Yeah.
okay,
And
thanks. Yeah.
that's the only other picture I know of Lucian that I've ever seen, is the newspaper picture plus the one at the
Yeah.
firehouse.
I have one picture up there when I was a baby in a carriage that somebody took. But I have lots of pictures. But actually, when I moved into senior housing and smaller quarters, I put them all in a big something or other. So, whereas in Stanfordville, we had a big living room and full of pictures and a drawer full of pictures, and but.
Well, that'll be your
That's-
winter project. You have to
Yeah.
find pictures for us.
I want to ask you about the water and what happened in the winter. I mean, was the well deep enough that it wouldn't freeze, or how did you?
I
get
guess
water?
it never froze. It must have been deep enough. I don't remember ever being without water, and naturally there wasn't running water then, so it didn't freeze. I suppose later on in all the older houses in the area, that pipes would freeze once in a while. But I don't remember not ever having water. Evidently they knew enough about the weather to bring it in and have enough inside near the wood stoves. Maybe I don't remember that.
Were you in the house when it got the electricity? Like,
I don't remember. I do remember lamps and kerosene lamps vaguely. But even now I have, well, I think I do have one that came from that house. Or did I give it away? I don't know where it is. That you would put kerosene in and light it.
There's actually what you're referring to as like the garage wood shop. There's it looked like it would have been a second well. Do you remember that? It's a brick stone lined.
Oh.
It's been filled in.
I think I vaguely remember it, but
There's a second well, because I know the well you're speaking of right
Yeah.
in the kitchen. It's
Yeah.
still there. It's just covered with
Covered
two stone
up.
slabs.
uh-huh.
There's no wood structure.
Oh, uh-huh.
At first we couldn't find our well when we did our water test, and so
Oh.
we thought there was a second well that was dug, but there's a stone structure that looks like a well, so I don't know if, remember that?
I don't really remember, yeah.
And do you remember they're still there, there's these stone-lined flower beds right in front of, in between the house and the garage. Do you remember those being there? And what would have been planted there?
I think maybe the people in between my aunt and you might have. My grandmother had lots of flower beds. She had a row of irises, and there was a big maple tree in the yard. I don't know if it's still there, a great big one. And around that, there were lily of the valley. It's so funny where I live now, there's somebody's always cutting it back. She said, it spread so, it's awful, it spread so. But I don't remember them ever cutting it back. It was so pretty. And when my mother's younger sister got married, I remember picking the lilies of the valley for her wedding bouquet.
Which sister was that?
Frances.
Frances. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Do you remember what, like, or I guess, could you describe Lucienne and Belle each in 3 words, like personality-wise, or?
In 3 words?
In a few words.
In a few words. Probably the nicest people ever that would have taken my mother and us 3 children in, and them just doing everything for us. And it seems like it was the happiest childhood that ever could be. I mean, it was probably cold and hot in the summer and cold in the winter, but always happy. My grandfather liked to play checkers with his friends over in the garage there. There would be a place, then there was the one up where Shiro's had a place across from the school building, and they had a store. Yeah, there were a couple of stores that from school we would go down there and buy penny candy that you can't do anymore. And he played, my grandmother, like I said, she joined the WCTU, and she was neighborly with all the women around Stanfordville. Up the other road towards Stanfordville, there was a Mrs. Clark and a Mrs. Whiteley and a Mrs. Barrett and the Dillingers. The Dillingers moved up towards Huns Lake with the Freers,
Right.
The Robinsons. Florence Germain lived in Stanfordville. She was quite a historical kind of person.
Yeah.
Florence Robinson Germain.
And Clark, Mrs. Clark, her husband was the first fire chief.
What was his?
Clark, because it was Almador Clark was the
Oh.
first fire chief
Oh, okay.
in
So
1931. So
they're
and
just-
they lived along on 82.
they're just down the road from here, the Clarks that I knew.
Yeah, and he was the fire chief.
Oh,
Yeah, the same family. So that's. Did they ever have any of the temperance meetings at the house?
I think sometimes they would come, a few ladies. I
Yeah.
remember them coming. Yeah, they would come. And I can't remember who they were. Maybe a Mrs. Post.
Mm-hmm.
There were the Posts. There was a Post who was head of the mail department. What do you call them?
Oh, postmaster.
Postmaster. Yeah.
Right. And actually, Ella Haight, that lived up in Stissing.
I remember the Hates.
She had a book. She was involved with the temperance too.
Oh.
And Dot was given things from, I guess, her estate.
Oh.
And there's a book in the historian's office, and it goes like from mid-19, I'm going to say 1915 thereabouts. So that would have been like the real start of the temperance time and the vote for women and everything. And it goes into the early 30s. And the book contains their dues, their membership. There's some items in it about meetings that they held. So when we leave here, I'm gonna look and see if, for Belle, I'm gonna look for Belle's name in that book.
It's funny, her name was Isabel, actually. And they didn't like Isabel. I like Isabel. I don't
Were any
like
of the kids, like generations later, named for her?
Dorothy Bell and my sister, Virginia Bell.
Nice.
And was Lucienne primarily a farmer, is that?
He was primarily a farmer, but I always think he's a really smart man. He was a carpenter. He built some houses in this area. Actually built a house in Millbrook for my Aunt Frances and her family. He was also a substitute mail carrier, and he was a fireman. And he butchered. He'd butcher for pigs, probably pigs. I don't know about cows, but probably. I only know because he never butchered. I never saw any cows butchered on our property, but I remember the pigs. So he was a lot. He was a farmer, a carpenter, a butcher. He sawed wood. He carried mail.
Nice.
One contractor mentioned a 4x4 vault in the floor, which probably would have been where the kitchen was. Do you know anything about that? Had you ever heard of it?
I never saw it, and I'm wondering why this cousin of mine saw a hole, because she's much younger than me and didn't live there. No.
I guess we'll wrap it up.
Okay, that was fun.